Hey everyone. If you're looking for a story that makes you question the true cost of perfection and the unexpected paths to love, hit that like button, subscribe to our channel, and let us know in the comments below where you're watching from and what tube it is for you. It's always exciting to see who's joining us from around the world. The Millionaire and the Melody. The incessant beeping of machines was the melody that accompanied Eleanor Vance each morning. Her agile fingers adjusted the IV drip, while her eyes, brown and sharp like a hawk's, scanned the patient's vital signs. 12-hour shift, and she was only on her third. "Mrs. Davies, if you pull out that IV again, I'll have to tie you to the bed like a piñata at Christmas," she said, with a smile that softened the warning. Her tone was firm, but warm. That perfect balance she had perfected in her 5 years as head nurse. The elderly woman grumbled something about modern hospitals and "in my day," but Eleanor was already checking the next chart. Her black hair, pulled back in a practical ponytail, swayed as she walked down the hallway of St. Jude's Hospital, with the authority of someone who knew every inch of the place. "Roberts, did you prepare the doses for room 304? She asked a rookie nurse who looked more lost than a penguin in the desert. I was about to. Being about to doesn't save lives. Do it now." Her voice admitted no reply, but didn't distill cruelty either. It was pure efficiency, the same efficiency that had made her advance when others got stuck. Dr. Smith passed her, accidentally brushing her shoulder. "Excuse me, Eleanor. It's fine, doctor. If you wanted to touch me, you could have asked me to dinner first." She joked with that acidic humor that served as her protective shield. The doctor visibly blushed, already accustomed to her sharp tongue, but charmed by her unwavering professionalism. Eleanor had no time for hospital romances, nor for romances in general. At 30, she had built an impenetrable wall around her emotions. It wasn't coldness, it was survival. She had seen too many patients leave, too many relationships fail. Prince Charming was a myth, and she preferred reality. Her small but her own apartment, her savings growing month by month, and the satisfaction of being indispensable. In the break room, she collapsed onto a chair and pulled out her phone. 15 minutes. That's all she had before returning to the battle. 50 miles away, in a mansion that looked straight out of an architectural magazine, Alexander Stone threw a glass of water against the wall, causing a crash that made the housekeeper tremble. "I said sparkling mineral water with a slice of lime, not this tap water." His deep, authoritative voice resonated throughout the room. The cervical collar around his neck seemed to imprison not only his body, but also his patience. I'm sorry, Mr. Stone," stammered the woman, bending down to pick up the broken glass. "Leave it. You've done enough." Alexander ran a hand through his dark brown hair, a frustrated gesture he repeated constantly since the accident. 3 weeks confined, depending on others, for the most basic tasks. For a man who controlled a business empire, it was worse than death. The door burst open, and Isabel Stone entered like a whirlwind of energy and expensive perfume. Her cream-colored dress contrasted with her tanned skin and perfectly styled blonde hair. "Still terrorizing the staff, little brother?" she asked, leaning in to kiss his cheek without waiting for a reply. "At this rate, we'll run out of service before the weekend." Alexander grumbled something unintelligible. His younger sister was the only person in the world who could talk to him like that, without consequences. "I don't care. I'll hire others. How have you hired the 3 nurses who lasted less than ice cream in the desert?" Isabel sat opposite him, crossing her legs elegantly. "Alexander, you need professional help. Your injury isn't a game. What I need is to be left alone. I can take care of myself." Isabel let out a laugh that sounded like chimes. "Really? And how do you plan to shower with that collar, or get dressed, or take your medication correctly?" Alexander looked away towards the windows overlooking the garden. He hated that she was right. "I'll find a way." "No, I'll find it for you." Isabel pulled out her phone and began typing furiously. "I'm sick of seeing you like this. And I'm sick of you howling at every professional who tries to help you." "What are you doing?" Suspicion tinged Alexander's voice. "Placing an ad. And this time, I'm going to make sure whoever comes knows exactly what kind of monster they're dealing with." Her fingers flew across the screen. "And I'm going to offer a salary that makes putting up with you worth it." "Isabel, don't you dare!" "Too late." She smiled triumphantly, showing him the screen. Published. The screen read, "Nurse wanted. 3 months. $1 million pay. Requirements. Infinite patience. Strong character. And 0 fear of monsters." What do you think prompted Nicholas's panic attack? How will his encounter with Sophia change his perception of human connection? Share your insights below. Back at the hospital, Eleanor was gathering her things to leave. The shift had been brutal. 2 code blues, a child with a severe allergic reaction, and an elderly woman who insisted on flirting with every doctor who passed her room. On the bus, with her forehead resting against the cold glass, she mentally reviewed her budget. The rent was going up next month. The washing machine was on its last legs, and her mother needed dental treatment that insurance didn't fully cover. The ding of a notification pulled her from her calculations. It was a job alert, one of those she had set up months ago looking for something that paid better. Her eyes widened at the figure offered. It was obscene, impossible, the kind of money that would solve all her problems in one fell swoop. She read the requirements and let out a dry laugh. Infinite patience, strong character, and 0 fear of monsters. It sounded like the description of her current job, only better paid. As for monsters, none has beaten me yet, she muttered to herself as the bus stopped at her stop. Without thinking twice, her thumb pressed apply. What Eleanor didn't know was that she had just pressed the button that would change her life forever. The next day, her phone rang at 7 a.m. A female voice, polite but direct, offered her an immediate interview. 2 hours later, Eleanor found herself in front of wrought iron gates so tall they seemed to touch the sky. The security guard looked her up and down, assessing her simple navy blue dress and practical shoes. With a bored gesture, he directed her to proceed along the gravel path that wound up to a mansion that looked straight out of a movie. Eleanor gripped her purse strap tightly. She wasn't intimidated, but she wasn't stupid either. Whoever the monster mentioned in the ad was, he had to be someone with enough power and money to live in a place like this. She took a deep breath and walked firmly toward the enormous front door. Before she could ring the bell, the door opened, revealing a blonde woman with a dazzling smile. "You must be Eleanor Vance," she said, extending a perfectly manicured hand. "I'm Isabel Stone, and I think you've come to save my brother, and possibly all of us." The stone mansion loomed imposingly against the clear sky of that spring morning. Eleanor observed the neoclassical facade as Isabel guided her through a marble foyer so vast it could house her entire apartment. "Excuse the mess," Isabel commented with an ironic smile, gesturing to an absolute perfection that made decoration magazines look like second-hand catalogs. Murano glass vases, paintings that surely cost more than 5 years of her salary, and a spiral staircase that ascended as if it were the path to paradise. But Eleanor knew, from the ad's description, that climbing those stairs would probably lead her to hell. "It's cozy," she replied, with an irony that made Isabel laugh. Both knew that word was ridiculously inadequate to describe such opulence. "I like you, Eleanor," Isabel said, leading her to a side living room. "And believe me, that's exactly what you'll need to survive here." They sat on an immaculate white sofa. A maid instantly appeared with a tray of tea and pastries. "Before you meet my brother, I want to be completely honest with you," Isabel began. pouring tea into porcelain cups so thin they seemed translucent. Alexander isn't an easy person even on his best days. Since the accident, he's become unbearable. Eleanor took a sip of tea. Earl Grey. Perfect. Define unbearable. Demanding, impatient, rude, temperamental. Isabel enumerated like someone reciting a shopping list. He scared off 3 professional nurses in less than a month. The last one lasted exactly 4 hours and 23 minutes. Impressive, Eleanor murmured, unfazed. What exactly happened? The accident, I mean. Skiing in the Alps. Alexander has always believed he's invincible. Isabel sighed, a sound that combined exasperation and fraternal affection. He went off-piste looking for more adrenaline and ended up crashing into a tree. Cervical fracture. Doctors say he was lucky not to be paralyzed. And how long has he had the cervical collar? 3 weeks. He has at least 2 more months. Isabel leaned forward, her expression suddenly serious. Eleanor, the salary we're offering is exceptionally high because the job is exceptionally difficult. My brother isn't just a complicated patient. He's the CEO of Stone Investments. He's used to everyone trembling at his commands. Patients don't scare me, no matter how rich or powerful they are, Eleanor replied calmly. In her head, she kept calculating what she could do with that money. Pay off debts, help her mother, perhaps even make a down payment on her own apartment. I've dealt with all kinds of people at the hospital. Isabel looked at her with a mix of admiration and doubt. This is different. Alexander doesn't want help. He hates feeling vulnerable, and he'll do everything he can to make you quit. Well, he'll have to try very hard, Eleanor countered with a defiant smile. Because if there's one thing I've learned in the emergency room, it's that surrender is not an option. A thunderous crash, like something heavy falling to the floor, followed by a string of curses, interrupted their conversation. Isabel closed her eyes for a moment, as if seeking patience. It seems my brother just tried to pour himself coffee, again. She rose elegantly. Are you ready to meet the monster? They climbed the stairs to the 2nd floor, where the hallway stretched with several closed doors. The last one, at the end, was ajar. A physical aura of frustration and rage emanated from it. Alexander, there's someone I want you to meet, Isabel announced, gently pushing the door open. The room was a spectacular suite, with floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking perfectly manicured gardens. In the middle of that royal-worthy space, a man was trying to pick up the remains of a broken cup with one hand while keeping the other firmly supported on the back of a chair. He turned slowly, limited by the cervical collar, and Eleanor understood why Isabel had used the word monster with such irony. Alexander Stone was physically quite the opposite. Tall, with broad shoulders encased in a light blue linen shirt, a defined jaw, and penetrating eyes the color of dark amber. His slightly disheveled hair added a rebellious contrast to his obvious sophistication. But then he spoke, and the spell was broken. Another one? Seriously, Isabel? His voice was deep, but sharp as a knife. How many more nurses do you plan to parade through here? Is this some kind of reality show you're producing without telling me? Eleanor was not intimidated. She took 2 steps forward and extended her hand. Eleanor Vance, head nurse at St. Jude's Hospital. A pleasure to meet you, Mr. Stone. He looked at her hand, as if she had offered him a dead fish. Save the formalities. You won't stay long enough for it to matter what you call me. Isabel rolled her eyes. Alexander, please, Eleanor has experience with difficult patients. I hope you're not another one who comes to play the hero, he continued, ignoring his sister. His eyes scrutinized Eleanor from head to toe, evaluating her with clinical coldness. The last one treated me like I was a 5-year-old child. The one before that, like I was a terminal invalid. Eleanor held his gaze without blinking. Don't worry, I didn't come to save you. I came to get paid. A tense silence fell over the room. Alexander slightly raised an eyebrow, the only gesture his immobility allowed him to show surprise. "At least you're honest," he finally murmured. "Always. It's more efficient than making up excuses," she replied, bending down to pick up the porcelain fragments he had been trying to gather. She did it with precise and swift movements, revealing years of practice in similar tasks. "And now, may I examine your collar? It seems ill-fitting." Alexander visibly tensed. "I don't need anyone to examine it. I'm perfectly fine. Your grimace of pain every time you try to turn your head says otherwise," Eleanor observed, crossing her arms. "I can adjust it in 30 seconds, or you can continue to suffer unnecessarily. Your choice." Isabel stifled a smile at the bewilderment in her brother's eyes. It was clear he was unaccustomed to anyone speaking to him like that, much less someone he had just met and who worked for him. "5 minutes," Isabel finally said. "I'll leave you two to get acquainted. Eleanor, your room will be ready when you're done." And with that, she left, closing the door behind her. Eleanor approached Alexander, who remained rigid as a statue. "Sit down, please. It will be easier. I don't take orders in my own house," he replied, but his voice had lost some of its edge. "It's not an order. It's a professional suggestion." Eleanor maintained her serene tone. "If you prefer me to do it while you're standing, perfect. But I'll need a chair to properly reach your height." Something resembling a fleeting smile crossed Alexander's face before he could suppress it. Without a word, he sat on the edge of the bed. Eleanor positioned herself in front of him, and, with expertly gentle fingers, began to examine the cervical collar. Her closeness filled the air with a subtle scent of lavender, simple but comforting. "It's too tight at the base," she commented, adjusting the straps. "How long has it been since anyone checked it?" "Since the last nurse ran away." "What exactly did you do to her?" Eleanor asked with genuine curiosity, while continuing to work on the collar. Alexander let out a snort that could have been a laugh. "I told her technique made me feel like I was being cared for by an orangutan in boxing gloves." Eleanor laughed, a frank sound that seemed to surprise them both. "You won't last 3 days," he sentenced, narrowing his eyes. She finished adjusting the collar and took a step back, admiring her work with professional satisfaction. Then, looking directly into his eyes, she smiled with defiance. "Well, bet on it, my king, because I plan to stay here." What do you think is the real reason behind Alexander's harshness? Will Eleanor's resilience break through his walls? Share your insights in the comments below. A reluctant connection, the first week at the mansion passed like a battle of wills. Every morning, Eleanor Vance entered Alexander Stone's room with a tray of meticulously organized medications and a professional smile that concealed her iron determination. "Good morning, Mr. Stone. It's time for your painkillers," she announced, drawing back the curtains to let in the golden light of dawn. Alexander grumbled, burying his face in the pillow like a teenager reluctant to go to school. "Close those curtains if you don't want me to fire you before breakfast. If you fire me, who will explain to the doctor why your recovery is so slow?" Eleanor placed the pills next to a glass of water on the nightstand. "Besides, vitamin D is essential for bone consolidation." It was a constant dance. He ordered. She evaluated. He threatened. She parried with impeccable logic. He tried to intimidate her with his position. She reminded him that in the face of illness, all humans were equal. During physical therapy exercises, the tension between them intensified until it became almost palpable. Eleanor's hands, firm but delicate, guided the limited movements Alexander could perform. Her professional touch broke through the barrier of hostility he tried to maintain. 10 more repetitions, she instructed, as she gently supported his arm. "I've done enough," he protested, though his body automatically responded to the directives of those expert hands. "You always give up when things get tough." Eleanor's provocation was subtle, calibrated exactly to activate Alexander's competitive pride. He looked up, meeting those brown eyes that never shied away from his. "I never give up. It's part of my success. Prove it then." And so, day after day, Alexander completed exercises he swore he couldn't do. He took medications he initially rejected and followed instructions he would have categorically ignored in any other circumstance. Dinners were another battlefield. Isabel had insisted that Eleanor accompany them in the main dining room, a majestic room with a table so long it seemed designed for international negotiations rather than family meals. "Tell us, Eleanor," Isabel asked one night, pouring wine into crystal glasses. "Did you always want to be a nurse?" Before she could answer, Alexander intervened. "Let me guess. A childhood vocation. Some touching story about saving a sick relative." Eleanor meticulously cut a piece of meat. "Actually, it was for money. My mother was left alone when my father abandoned us. Nursing promised job stability." The silence that followed made her look up. Alexander was watching her with a new intensity, as if he had just discovered a valuable object where he only expected to find something common. "Brutal honesty. Refreshing," he murmured. That night, as she checked Alexander's nightly medication in his room, the atmosphere had subtly changed. The hostility remained, but now mixed with something more complex, more electric. "If you don't take your medicine, I'll have to inject it where you least expect it," she warned, when he made a move to reject a pill. A spark of something dangerous flashed in Alexander's amber eyes. "Is that a threat or a promise, Nurse Vance?" The air between them suddenly became charged. Eleanor felt an unexpected heat rising up her neck, but she maintained her professional composure with effort. "Take your pill, Mr. Stone." He obeyed, not looking away as he swallowed. "Satisfied?" "Enormously," she replied, deliberately ignoring the double meaning that hung between them. The nightly conversations with Isabel became a ritual Eleanor looked forward to. On the terrace, under a starry sky she had never been able to appreciate in the city, the two women shared tea and confidences. "I'd never seen Alexander give in to anyone," Isabel confessed one night, swirling the herbal infusion in her cup. "It's like you've discovered a language only he understands." Eleanor contemplated the garden lights thoughtfully. "He's not that complicated. He just needs someone not to be afraid of him, but also not to try to change him." "And you don't try to change him?" Isabel's question came with a penetrating gaze. "My job is to help him heal physically. His personality is not my responsibility." But even as she said it, Eleanor wondered if it was entirely true, because something was changing, both in Alexander and in herself. She noticed it in small details, how he no longer pretended to be asleep when she came in the mornings, how sometimes she caught him observing her when he thought she wasn't looking, how their arguments had evolved into intellectual debates where both enjoyed the mutual challenge. One afternoon, while reading the results of his latest tests, Alexander abruptly asked, "Why aren't you married?" The question took her so by surprise that she almost dropped the chart. "Excuse me?" "An intelligent, attractive woman with a stable job. You seem like the complete package by societal standards." His tone was analytical, as if evaluating a potential investment. "Perhaps because I haven't found anyone worth more than my independence," she replied sincerely. Something changed in Alexander's expression, an almost imperceptible softening around his eyes. A sensible answer. That night, as she adjusted his cervical collar, Eleanor's fingers accidentally brushed the skin of his neck. A fleeting contact, barely an instant. Alexander inhaled sharply. She lost her balance for a second, destabilized by her own reaction to that minimal contact. She fell forward, her hands instinctively seeking support. The The world seemed to slow down as she suddenly found herself leaning over him on the sofa, their faces inches apart, their breaths mingling in the air, charged with tension. Alexander's eyes involuntarily dropped to her lips. Eleanor felt as if gravity had increased, pulling her towards him with an almost irresistible force. Time stood still in that moment, suspended between professionalism and desire, between reason and instinct, between what was right and what was inevitable. The moment hung in the air like a drop of crystal about to shatter on the floor. Eleanor reacted first, regaining her professional balance with a fluid movement. She straightened up, adjusting her uniform with hands that betrayed a slight tremble. "Excuse my clumsiness," she murmured, taking a step back. Her voice sounded strange even to herself. "The collar is correctly adjusted now." Alexander watched her with an inscrutable expression, as if trying to solve a particularly complex enigma. "Do you always run away from situations you can't control, Nurse Vance?" His question floated between them, laden with implicit meanings. "I'm not running away. I'm setting professional boundaries," she replied, gathering the medical instruments scattered on the small table. A slow, almost predatory smile appeared on Alexander's lips. "And do those boundaries protect you or me?" The question remained unanswered when the door opened without warning. Isabel entered with her usual energy, but stopped upon sensing the charged atmosphere in the room. "Am I interrupting something?" "Your brother needs to rest," Eleanor replied, taking the opportunity to escape that magnetic tension. "The medication should take effect in approximately 20 minutes. What do you think is the future of Alexander and Eleanor's relationship? Will their growing connection lead to something more, despite the challenges? Share your predictions below. The confession and the storm. The next morning, something had subtly changed in their dynamic. Alexander waited for her, awake, a steaming cup of coffee next to his on the breakfast tray. "Good morning," he greeted her when she entered the room, surprise evident on his face at seeing the two cups. "The coffee gets cold fast." Eleanor accepted the implicit invitation, sitting on the edge of the chair by the window. "Thank you. I didn't know you remembered how I like it. With milk and no sugar. I watched you last week," he explained casually, as if memorizing her preferences was routine. They drank in a strangely comfortable silence, while the morning sun bathed the room in golden tones. For the first time, Eleanor allowed herself to study Alexander, without the defensive barrier she had maintained since her arrival. She noticed the small wrinkles at the corners of his eyes, signs of past smiles that contrasted with his current perpetual frown. "May I ask you something personal?" Alexander's voice interrupted her thoughts. "It depends on the question. Why did you really accept this job? And don't tell me it was just for the money. There are better paying jobs for someone with your qualifications." Eleanor contemplated the dark liquid in her cup, considering her answer. "My mother needs an operation that insurance doesn't fully cover, and I want to buy my own apartment, not keep paying rent indefinitely." "Practical purposes." Alexander nodded, appreciative. "Refreshing in a world where everyone pretends more noble motivations. And you? Why did you build this business empire? Just for money?" The question seemed to take him by surprise. No one normally questioned his motivations. "Control," he replied after a pause, with an honesty that surprised them both. "My father abandoned my mother when we were children. We were left with nothing. I swore I would never feel that helpless again." Their gazes met over the rims of their coffee cups, a moment of mutual understanding more intimate than any physical contact. "Control is an illusion," Eleanor murmured. "I learn that every day in my work. Life has its own plans." "And that doesn't terrify you?" he asked, genuinely curious. "Sometimes. But it also frees me from the responsibility of pretending I can control everything." Over the next few days, their morning conversations became a routine they both secretly anticipated. Fragments of childhoods, postponed dreams, small confessions exchanged like valuable coins from a personal treasure. Alexander began to visibly improve. The exercises he once performed under protest, he now completed with renewed determination. Eleanor noticed how he observed her when she demonstrated a procedure, his attention intense, concentrated. One afternoon, while preparing his medication, Alexander abruptly asked, "Would you stay? After the 3 months, I mean." The question made Eleanor almost spill the liquid she was carefully measuring. "As your nurse." Alexander looked away towards the gardens. "As whatever you want to be." The words floated between them, loaded with unexplored possibilities, with paths neither had contemplated at the beginning of that temporary arrangement. Before Eleanor could answer, the phone rang, its strident ringing an intrusion from the outside world. Alexander answered with evident irritation, his expression changing as he listened. "Robert," he explained after hanging up, tension returning to his shoulders. "Company problems. He says they need me to return immediately, with or without a cervical collar." "Your partner sounds charming," Eleanor commented ironically. "He's a corporate shark, like I used to be." Alexander intertwined his fingers with hers again. "But I think it's time for me to rethink certain priorities." "Well, what do you think Alexander's family will demand he choose between his business empire and Eleanor? How will he respond to this ultimatum? Share your predictions below." A choice made from the heart, the Stone Investments headquarters occupied the top 5 floors of a glass and steel skyscraper in the city's financial district. Alexander gazed at the panoramic view from his office, the metropolis stretching beneath his feet, like a chessboard he had manipulated at will for years. Robert Miller reviewed the reports scattered on the mahogany desk, his grim expression accentuated by the artificial light. "Shares have fallen 4% since your absence," he pointed out, adjusting his metal-rimmed glasses. "Investors need to see you in charge, Alexander. Showing weakness in this business is like bleeding in a shark tank." Alexander slowly turned, still limited by the cervical collar that constantly reminded him of his newfound vulnerability. "Weakness," he repeated, savoring the word as if it were a strange concept. "Is that what you call recovering from an injury that could have left me paralyzed? Your nurse." Rumors were already circulating throughout the company. "My personal life is not the board's business. It is when it affects the value of our shares," Robert insisted, approaching with the familiarity of someone who had shared years of corporate battles. "Alexander, I know you. You've always separated business from pleasure. What's happening to you?" Alexander observed his partner with new eyes. Had he always been this cold, this calculating? Or was it he who had changed? "Perhaps I'm learning that there's a world beyond quarterly charts and hostile mergers," he replied calmly. "A world where value isn't measured in market percentages." Robert looked at him as if he had grown a second head. "Are you listening to yourself? You sound like those corporate hippies from Silicon Valley." He ran a hand through his perfectly styled hair. "Look, I understand the accident was traumatic, but you need to get back on track. The company needs you in top form. I need you." Alexander walked to his desk and picked up a document he had prepared that morning. He extended it to Robert. "What is this?" Robert asked, frowning as he read. "My resignation as operating CEO. I'll retain my shareholding, but you'll take over daily control of the company." The silence that followed was so thick it could almost be cut with a knife. Robert visibly paled. "This is madness. You can't be serious." "I've never been more serious," Alexander affirmed, a strange lightness expanding in his chest with each word. "For years I believed that this office, this power, was the only thing that defined me, the only thing that protected me from feeling like that abandoned, helpless child I once was." He walked to the window again, his reflection superimposed on the city sprawling below him. But I've discovered that true strength isn't in controlling, but in allowing yourself to be vulnerable, in consciously choosing which battles are worth fighting. It's her, isn't it? Robert's voice was tinged with disbelief. You're throwing away everything we've built for a woman you barely know? Alexander smiled, recalling the nightly conversations with Eleanor, the whispered confessions, the shared silences that said more than 1,000 words. I'm not throwing anything away. I'm choosing to build something different. He turned to his old friend and partner. Something no financial crisis or market fluctuation can destroy. What do you think will be the most significant change in Arthur's life after this decision? How will he adapt to a life outside the corporate world? Share your thoughts below. A promise in the garden of Stone Manor, string lights suspended among the ancient trees twinkled like terrestrial stars. An elegantly set table awaited beneath a canopy of white flowers that perfumed the spring night. Eleanor watched the preparations with awe, her fingers nervously fiddling with the hem of her midnight blue dress, the first she had allowed herself to buy in years. "What is all this?" she asked, when she sensed Alexander's presence behind her. He moved to stand by her side, his posture noticeably more relaxed than weeks ago, despite the cervical collar he still wore as a precaution. "A celebration," he replied, taking her hand gently. "The beginning of something new." He led her to the table, where a champagne bottle rested in ice, and 2 crystal glasses awaited to be filled. "You resigned?" Eleanor guessed, reading his expression. Alexander nodded, pouring her a glass. "I've reordered my priorities. Robert will take over operational management while I focus on more strategic areas, and my recovery, of course." "Are you sure that's what you want?" "For the first time in my life, completely sure." His eyes gleamed with a new intensity, free from the defensive shadows that had always accompanied them. "Though I fear this means I'll no longer need a full-time nurse." Eleanor felt a knot forming in her throat. "I suppose our contract has served its purpose then." Alexander placed his glass on the table and took both of Eleanor's hands in his. With some difficulty due to the collar, he knelt before her on the perfectly manicured lawn. "I had a speech prepared," he confessed, with a shy smile that revealed a side of Alexander Stone few had ever seen. "About transformations and second chances, but I think simplicity is more honest." He took a deep breath, his eyes fixed on hers. "I don't know if I can get all the way down, but if you help me remove this collar, I promise to dedicate every day to making you the happiest woman in the world." From his pocket, he produced a small, dark blue velvet box. As he opened it, a sapphire ring surrounded by tiny diamonds caught the light from the stars and garlands. "It's not a marriage proposal, not yet," he clarified, at Eleanor's surprised expression. "It's a promise that this path we're beginning together, I want to walk step by step, without rushing, but without pausing." Eleanor knelt before him, matching his posture, her hands framing that face which had transformed from a difficult patient to the man who had broken down her own defenses. "Who would have thought that the monster from the ad would end up being my cure?" she whispered, tears of happiness sparkling in her eyes. His lips met hers in a kiss that sealed that unspoken promise perfectly understood. From afar, from the terrace, Isabel watched the scene with a knowing smile, raising her glass in a silent toast. When they separated, Alexander rested his forehead against Eleanor's, their breaths mingling in the small space between them. "Sometimes," he murmured, "true healing doesn't come from medicine or treatments." His fingers gently caressed Eleanor's cheek, but from the hands of someone who dared to stay when everyone else ran away. The ring found its place on Eleanor's finger, a glittering symbol of how the most unexpected paths can lead to the most perfect destiny. And under the starry canopy of that spring night, two souls who had built walls to protect themselves, discovered together the freedom that only exists when one dares to tear them down. Then what do you think is the real meaning behind the sapphire ring? And how will this unconventional promise shape their future? Share your thoughts below. A new legacy, a new and well-established routine began to take shape for Alexander and Eleanor. It wasn't immediate, nor perfect. Rebuilding trust is like hand-stitching torn fabric. It demands delicacy, constancy, and the acceptance that some marks will always remain visible. But love, that more mature and profound love, was the thread that united every gesture. Alexander became a constant presence at breakfast. He learned to make pancakes, although Leo always said moms were better. He took the children to school, helped with household chores, and even ventured to sell artisanal bread at the town fair, at the bakery he had opened with Eleanor. The townspeople, once skeptical, began to smile as they saw him pass. He was no longer the distant executive. He was Alexander, the twins' dad. Max was always the most expressive, the first to call him Alex Dad, mixing the names with a child's typical naturalness. Alexander laughed, moved each time. Leo, on the other hand, still called him only by his name. He was respectful, even affectionate, but there was an invisible barrier he still kept between them, and Alexander didn't force it. He waited, because he understood that true love also knows how to wait. Eleanor and Alexander, little by little, rediscovered each other's company. They started with long talks on the terrace. Then came walks through the market, Sunday lunches with music in the background. She laughed more. He slept better. They didn't need to tell each other they loved each other. It was implicit in every prolonged gaze, in every silent gesture, in every time he took her hand for no reason. Then, one ordinary night, with the scent of rain and a starry sky, the unexpected happened. Alexander was returning from school with the children. They had passed through the park, bought sweets, and laughed about something silly. Back home, Leo took his drawing notebook and showed a new illustration. It was him, Max, and Alexander, all wearing superhero capes. "This is Dad," he said, pointing to the central figure with a D on his chest. Alexander froze. He looked at Eleanor, who watched the scene with tears in her eyes. "You called me Dad?" he asked, trying to control his emotion. Max nodded with the serenity of someone who has made a big decision. "You weren't at first, but you are now." Alexander carefully hugged him, as if holding the world in his arms. Leo joined immediately, and the three of them stood there, hugging in the middle of the living room. Eleanor watched, a tear rolling down her cheek. It wasn't sadness. It was relief. It was the confirmation that, against all odds, love had found its way back. That night, the house seemed to breathe differently, as if every corner, every crack, smiled in unison. It was a new family, made of patches, second chances, and real feelings. There was no luxury, but there was presence. There was no perfection, but there was truth. And in that instant, Alexander knew with total certainty. He was not just a father, he was home. The sky over Willow Creek dawned clear, with a gentle breeze that caressed the freshly opened flowers in the central square garden. It was the first day of spring, as if even nature had decided to celebrate a new beginning. The benches were adorned with white ribbons and bouquets of daisies, while an arch of pink and lilac flowers surrounded the makeshift altar. And there, under that cloudless blue sky, Eleanor and Alexander were about to seal, before everyone, what time had failed to erase. Love. The guests settled into an emotional silence. There were the ladies from the cafe, lifelong neighbors, children from the school, mothers supported by the foundation that now bore Eleanor's name. No one could hide the emotion of seeing that story, marked by pain and overcoming, culminate in such a simple yet grand moment. Alexander, wearing a light gray suit, waited beside the officiant, with sweaty hands and a pounding heart. He looked at the garden and remembered every step to that moment. The ambitious young man who left, the empty man who returned, and the father who finally found himself. He knew none of that would have been possible without her strength. Eleanor was his spring after the longest winter of his life. In the distance, soft music began to play, and then the twins appeared. Max, as cheerful as ever, came skipping among the petals scattered on the ground. Leo, more serious, carried the ring pillow as if it were a treasure. Both wore small gray suits that made them look even more like their dad. Upon reaching the altar, Alexander's eyes filled with tears. They smiled proudly as if to say, "You made it, Dad, and so did we." Eleanor appeared shortly after in a simple white dress, her hair loose, and a crown of natural flowers. There was no luxury or ostentation, but there was beauty, a serene beauty that comes from the soul. She walked slowly, her gaze fixed on Alexander's, as if the world around them had disappeared. As they met, he whispered, "You are my miracle." She, smiling, replied, "You are my choice." The officiant's words were barely heard. The glances between them, the shared smiles, their intertwined fingers, all spoke for themselves. When it was time for the vows, Alexander took a deep breath and said, "I don't promise perfection, but I promise presence every day. In the good times and in the difficult ones, I promise to love not only you, but every step of our children, because now we are one." Eleanor, her voice breaking, replied, "I promise to forgive you every time the past tries to scare us, and to love you every time the present reminds us that it was worth fighting for. You came back, and now I know we will never be alone again." When they exchanged rings and the kiss sealed the union, the entire square stood to applaud. There were tears on almost every face, even on the old baker's, who was almost never moved. The children ran to hug them, and the image of that united quartet under a flowered sky remained in everyone's hearts. After the ceremony, a simple banquet was served. The children ran through the garden. The adults danced with flowers in their hair, and Alexander, with Leo in his arms, and Max clinging to his arm, laughed as he hadn't laughed in a long time. Eleanor watched him from afar with a calm smile. She knew that now everything was real, that after all, they had triumphed. Spring arrived not only on the calendar, but in their hearts. And in that small town, where love survived time, silence, and broken promises, life flourished again, as only it does when watered with truth. What was your favorite moment in Alexander and Eleanor's journey? Rate this story from 0 to 10 in the comments, and let us know what made it special for you. Don't forget to like and subscribe for more unforgettable stories.